Good morning, everyone. We are still waiting on a few people, so we're going to give it another minute or two before we get started. All right, good morning, everyone. I can see there are still some people joining us, but we're going to get started. Welcome to the Western New York Women's Foundation's first ever Pathways to Progress Speaker Series webinar. My name is Corey Fabian Barrett, and I am the Director of External Affairs at the Western New York Women's Foundation. I'm joined on the webinar this morning by today's speaker, Aimee Neri, and Mary Rossi, our Strategic Initiatives Coordinator. Thank you all for joining us today. The Western New York Women's Foundation exists to support the women and girls of our community, and this is a mission which has become even more critical in recent weeks. During these uncertain times, we've seen how a pandemic of this scale impacts and disrupts the lives of women in our communities. With school closures, people going into self-isolation, and strained support services, women have taken on increased unpaid caregiving needs. As women absorb more of these unpaid care responsibilities, they may also have to sacrifice their incomes. Lost hours and unpaid sick leave translates to more economic insecurity for women and their families. The gendered experience of coronavirus is based on gender inequalities that impact all of us every single day. That's why we at the Western New York Women's Foundation are actively continuing our work to advocate for women's economic empowerment, paid sick leave, and affordable, accessible childcare for everyone. So thank you for making the time to join us on this webinar today. We know your time is very precious and we really appreciate you joining us. We will continue creating these spaces for women to convene and learn in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for our upcoming offerings from the Western New York Women's Foundation. Before we get started this morning, I do have a few housekeeping notes. We will be online talking with you all for about an hour this morning. The full webinar is also being recorded and it will be freely available online afterwards if you want to go back and rewatch something or share it with a friend who wasn't able to make it today. In your webinar sidebar, you can see that there is a handout section which provides downloadable takeaways from today's presentation, as well as the full slide deck for your reference later. Also in your sidebar, just below that handout section, you will see that there is a chat box. We will be pausing for questions throughout the presentation today and for a bigger chunk of time at the very end of today's webinar. So if you have a question or you want to share an experience that you've had or something you found that helped you, please feel free to type it into the chat box at any time. Mary will be monitoring the chat closely throughout the webinar and sharing people's questions and thoughts out loud for everyone. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce today's speaker, Aimee Neri. Aimee is the statewide project manager for integrating trauma-informed practices into family court and ICWA projects. She is also the coordinator in the 8th Judicial District for the New York State Child Welfare Court Improvement Project. She has 19 years of experience in the child welfare field, providing training and technical assistance to organizational stakeholder groups, as well as supervising parent education programs, agency foster care and adoption programs, resource family certifications, and practicing child, family, and group therapy. She is a trained mediator with New York State Office of Court Administration and is a national and international presenter for multidisciplinary professional development, specializing in child welfare, integrating trauma-informed care, and vicarious trauma. Additionally, as if that were all not enough, Aimee is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Buffalo through the Graduate School of Social Work program. Thank you so much for being with us today, Aimee, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Corey and Mary, for having me with you today. Good morning, everyone. Thank all of you as well for finding the time to be with us today and truly to take this time out for yourself. I hope that our time together today will be something that is helpful and meaningful for you, particularly as we find ourselves all moving through this very new and unusual, experience in our community and our society. So, the topic for today is burnout is real. And while that had been the plan, originally, we did talk about how it was really important for us to expand a little bit on that idea today, particularly since we are in the midst of a community and really global crisis. And it felt irresponsible to not make sure that we were acknowledging that and talking about how the additional stress and challenges that come with the experience that we are currently all moving through is also aligned with the idea of burnout and really maximizes and increases the impact that stress can have on our day-to-day work, our normal obligations, and then in addition, these extenuating factors as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll switch slides. Corey is going to be doing a great job of helping me today to kind of navigate the slides while we're talking. The first thing that I want to do is just give an overview of what we hope to gain for today. The first is that, there's a lot of language that gets used interchangeably around burnout and compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, critical stress, and so on. So we want to take a moment to highlight a few of those definitions and ensure that we have a collective understanding of those definitions and that we're all kind of talking from the same framework. Spend a little bit of time recognizing the impact that any one of those challenges has on our bodies and our minds and our functioning, and then move into some real concrete ways that we can not only think about how to take some preventive measures and also talk about some effective responses when we're kind of finding ourselves in the muck of the stress already. And then finally, finish with, some discussion around hope, that this is something that is manageable, that it can be managed, and really not just thinking about this in terms of the concern, but also the hope for being able to move through this. Okay, so let's move on to some definitions. There's three key definitions that I thought made the most sense for us to talk about today. The first one being burnout. And when we think about burnout, we want to think about it as that physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that can happen as a result of prolonged stress and the constant demands. Now, generally, we would talk about that in terms of our professional capacities. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that burnout can really happen in our personal lives as well, when the constant demands and stress that we have is becoming overwhelming, as well as that intersectionality between the demands of work and the demands of our home life. And when you think about burnout, I'm sure that most of you have heard the phrase burning the candle at both ends. And I think that that's a really important way to visualize and think about this. It's the idea that, kind of there's no outlet or release or pause but that no matter what angle you're coming at, there's one more thing that's being asked of you and one more thing that you're having to do to put out into the world for um, tending to the needs of other individuals. We also think about it in terms of the idea that you can't pour from an empty cup. You have just so much energy, stamina on a daily basis, and that's just not physical. That's, again, mental and emotional. And if you're only giving out, giving out, giving out, and not doing anything to replenish, right, or kind of pour water back into your cup, eventually you're empty and there's nothing else for you to give. And that's where burnout really sets in. And it can turn into this space where you either are just completely uninterested in continuing to provide support or manage tasks. It can also be that you wish that you could do it and you want to still be doing it, and your brain and your body just kind of say, too bad. There's nothing left to give. You lose your language. You may be in a place where you can't necessarily formulate language and sentences in a way that makes sense, or you're looking at this project that you have in front of you or a task that has to get done for the day, and you just can't really seem to figure out how to take the next step to do it, even if it seems like something that would typically be no problem for you to do, right? Your brain and your body just shut down and say, there's nothing left. It's all done. The second that I want to talk about is compassion fatigue. And when we think about compassion fatigue, this really is that exhaustion that comes from constantly providing emotional support to other people. For some individuals, that's part of their day-to-day professional work, whether you're a therapist or you are clergy, or you're in any kind of a helping profession, or any role within your job where part of what you need to do is to listen to what other people are going through and then support them in navigating that. And again, the idea is that at some point it becomes overwhelming. You become drained by constantly having to be emotionally and mentally present in order to provide support for other people's needs. And oftentimes I think about this where you've come home from work and somebody in your family now wants to get on the phone and talk with you, or wants to spend a half an hour telling you about their problems of the day. And you're thinking to yourself, I just don't want to hear it. I can't do this anymore. I can't listen one more time to one more person tell me how bad it is for them. It's not that you don't care. It's that there's no energy left to give to that. And then finally, this other piece around critical stress or critical incident stress. And this is the piece that I thought very important for us to add today, given that we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. Critical stress or critical incident stress is typically something that we see professionally in roles that for emergency responders, law enforcement, social workers, individuals who are exposed to disturbing events in the midst of their day-to-day work. And that then creates cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and spiritual reactions in the professional who's being exposed to it. Now, the piece that I think that's important to add today is that any one of you could be in a position where you are also experiencing critical stress and critical incident stress. It might simply be because within your role at your job, the people around you, your coworkers, or the people that you're responsible for leading, programs managing, people that you're supervising are coming to you in heightened states of crisis on a regular basis because of what we're experiencing in the world. It might be because in your own personal life, you have for yourself or individuals who are, experiencing immediate crisis and, impact as a result of this pandemic. And so that exposure to disturbing events right now is heightened far beyond what we would typically think about in terms of, um, you know, it being specific to professions that, tend to be in more emergency response types of situation. Um, and the reason that I think it's important that we're talking about that today is because the things that we will now start to talk about in terms of prevention and response are helpful regardless of kind of where you might be finding yourself in terms of burnout, compassion fatigue, or critical stress, right? The interventions are the same, and they happen kind of along a continuum. Okay, so we can go ahead and switch slides. I will just take a minute to check in with Mary to see if there's anybody who's had anything to put in the chat box so far.
Hi, Amy. We don't have any questions yet, but I'm sure they're coming.
Okay, no problem. So then let's start by talking about preventive practices. And when we talk about preventive practices, we're going to break it up into two categories. The first one being the things that we need to tend to, the basic necessities for our physiological and mental functioning, those just the day-to-day tending to our basic needs. And then the second thing that we are going to talk about are practices. And this is where I think we have a little bit of animation on our slide. Yep. And those practices are the processes that we can learn to develop or strengthen if we're already using to build our stamina so that as we are faced with higher levels of stress, we are in a place where we can move through it in a more seamless way. I think it's really important to note here that when you're in the midst of something very difficult or a crisis or stress that is heightened beyond what it should be, being in the middle of it, you're just in the middle of it. There is no magic wand. There is no special recipe that makes it all better, where you're moving through the middle of something very, very challenging and you're saying, this is no problem. That's not reality. What we're really going to talk about are the preventive practices and then the responses where you can widen your window of tolerance to be able to sit in it while you have to and move through it and move out of it in a way that you don't get stuck. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Okay, so let's transition into the things that we need to tend to. Francois Mathieu is the co-developer and co-founder of an organization out of Kingston, Ontario called TEND, T-E-N-D. And her primary work is around how to provide support to professionals who are working in ways where burnout is heightened, secondary traumatic stress is heightened, critical stress is heightened. And she has spent time in an international think tank that's really identified three key components to kind of those basic necessities that we must tend to on a daily basis in order to have preventive measures in place. The first one being physiological needs, the second one being opportunities for connection, and then the third one being protection against slime. So, what do we mean by physiological needs? Well, literally, you need to drink water every day. You need to eat food every day that is healthy and nourishing to your body. You need to get sleep every day, and you need to go to the bathroom. It might sound silly that we would add in there that you need to go to the bathroom, except that it's called elimination for a reason. Our body cannot always be in a space where we're taking in and never releasing, right? Crying, is a great way to have elimination of toxic stress. And quite frankly, so is elimination. It's a basic physiological need. I can't tell you how many times I've come in contact with professionals, and maybe you have as well, where because of the level of stress in their job, because of the demands in their job, they might go 4 hours without going to the bathroom, or they've skipped breakfast and lunch because time just didn't allow for it. Or they stayed up really late working on a project and as a result lost sleep for the day. How many times have you noticed for yourself or someone else that you've had a lot to drink through the day? You've drank coffee, 1 cup every hour, or you've had tea throughout the day. You never really, or you've had pop and caffeine. You never really stopped to actually have a bottle of water, right? We're just human beings. That's it. We're not robots. We are not superheroes. As much as I think as women, we are in a space in time where we're still needing to feel like we have to prove ourselves, wanting to demonstrate that we can do it all, and quite frankly, sometimes believing that we can do it all. The reality is that we can't. And we certainly can't be as dynamic and complex and brilliant as we want to be if we haven't taken the time to ensure that our body is functioning. When we're at a point where we are saying to each other, I skipped breakfast and lunch today and I'm still doing great, or I'm operating on 2 hours of sleep and I'm still killing it at work today, we're at a point where we've become delirious and maybe even respectfully delusional. We're not actually doing what it is that we need to be doing for the day. I don't know about you, but once I get to a place where I'm so hungry that my body is starting to tell me I'm hungry, I can't think anymore. I get agitated, I get frustrated. We all know the expression hangry, that there's some real relevance to that. We need to feed our bodies. The other piece, again, is around elimination. Again, I don't know about you, but once I'm in a space where I have to tend to my physiological needs and I haven't done that, I don't necessarily even hear what somebody's saying to me anymore. I'm nodding, I'm smiling, and I'm just waiting for them to be done so that I can have a break where I can say, I need to come right back. We're not being functional in that way, and it's not helpful to our body in order to get us through to what we need to do every day. The second piece of it is that opportunities for connection. Now, this kind of happens, they talk about this happening in 2 different ways. The first part around opportunities for connection, right? And this is why we have that adorable picture of a puppy and a baby sleeping together. We need to have meaning in our lives. We are humans. As a living being, we are group people. We are herding people. We behaviorally need to make connection and contact with other individuals. We don't actually do well when we are in absolute isolation where there is no contact with any other living person. And we need it to be meaningful. So that might be friends and family. It might be community groups that you're connected to. It may even be taking the time today to be here, to sit with a group of other women who, though you may not be able to see each other, we know we're all together. We know we're all here in order to think about elements that are important for us to take care of ourselves. We can see that our attendees is up to 81, right? That means other people are out there with us. We're not alone. And the other piece of that is meaningful connection in terms of your work. The people who witness your experiences in your work, right? These are the people who you don't have to explain what you do. You don't have to kind of explain the type of stressors that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. They get it. They get it because they do the kind of work that you do. They do it because they're watching it happen as it's happening to you, and you have that same witnessing for them. That meaningful connection produces a drug in our brains called oxytocin. It's the bonding chemical. Now, I'll pause for a minute because we talk about there being a chemical composition of 3 different chemicals that are happening in our body that help to promote optimal functioning. The first one is cortisol. Now, we all know cortisol, that's kind of our stress drug, right? That's the cortisol is what gets produced in our body to help us get up in the morning, get in the shower, have a routine. We might exercise to give ourselves a little boost when we have a deadline for a presentation or some other type of project. We get that little burst of cortisol typically that helps us keep going. Little bits of cortisol are okay and necessary for us to function every day. Oxytocin, the bonding drug, and dopamine, the joy drug, are the other 2 chemical reactions that we need to produce in combination with that cortisol on a daily basis in order to achieve optimal functioning. That joy drug happens when we have meaningful connection with friends and family. We go to dinner, we share a meal together, we laugh together, we read a book together or see a movie together. We look at pictures that we find adorable, like babies and puppies. Clearly, I'm partial to this one. It might be looking at pictures of nature or being in nature. Things that bring us joy. It might be cooking or looking at pictures of delicious meals that have been put together, or doing it yourself and taking that picture. Sewing, whatever, singing, whatever it is that brings joy, and that bonding piece. That part where we're not just together, but we all feel like we are having a shared experience and that we witness the sharing of that experience for each other. Now, the final piece of it is kind of more about what we need to protect ourselves against instead of what we need to do. And we call that the protection against getting slimed. Now, we talk about slime as this concept where somebody kind of dumps on you, and they dump on you in a way that you are not willing or ready to take on. Sometimes it's because the details that someone is sharing about an issue are more than you really want to hear. Sometimes that slime is the intensity and frequency at which you are taking in unpleasant information, information that's anxiety provoking, information that's worrisome. So part of this is how we manage our own exposure to things like social media and the news, and how we manage our exposure based on the content that we are reading and watching. You know, I'm a licensed social worker and I work in child welfare. I learned a long time ago that TV shows like Criminal Minds, TV shows like, I always call them the letter shows, the CSI, the SVU, those types of shows generally I don't watch, I don't choose to watch, and I really can't watch because in my day-to-day work, I already get vivid pictures of things that are happening to vulnerable populations. When I come home, to watch more of it on TV sets my cortisol through the roof and sets my my energy right back through the roof again in a way that's not helpful. For other people, it might be other types of TV shows or newspaper, that stories that they're reading. But it's about knowing what is and isn't okay for your exposure and ensuring that you're regulating it. And in terms of that human connection, it's also about setting boundaries for yourself. So, if you're the person that people go to kind of tell their bad news and get things off their chest, being aware of what it is that you can take in at any given moment and having that agreement with that friend or professional partner or family member to say, you know, they come and they say, oh my gosh, I have the story I need to talk to you about. I'm so upset. And you need to be able to take a moment and check to say, am I in a position where I can hear that right now? And if you're not, that's okay. And to be able to say to them, I really want to help you and I want to listen. I don't think I'm going to be helpful right now because I'm not in a place where I can really hear it. It might be that all you need to say to them is, I need 5 minutes. I just kind of have to go ground myself and then I'll come back and I'll be ready. It might be that you have to say, tell me tomorrow. We can talk about this tomorrow. I can't do it today. And it means that your friend will do the same for you. When you need to go talk to them about something, they will set limits so that they can be as present as possible in a helpful way, not just kind of taking it on because somebody wants to dump. It also means that you might choose to leave out certain details. So, I mean, again, I'll use my own example. As a child welfare social worker, right? We see what we see, and a lot of it is disturbing. And I might need to talk about an experience that I just witnessed or was a part of with one of my coworkers. I also, however, can think about how much detail I'm giving them, because the reality is that once I kind of say one category, right, I was dealing with a case that included violence, right, against a particular group of people. My coworker probably has a very good picture in their mind already based on their own experiences of what that might look like. I don't have to give them the play-by-play. I don't have to create a vivid picture about what it was that happened to be able to talk about my feelings and how I'm reacting to it. And by limiting those vivid details, I'm also helping to protect them against slime, and hopefully they will be doing the same for me when it's my turn to listen to them. Right? Think about this in terms of, you know, we talk a lot about the oxygen mask on an airplane. You can't, you know, you put yours on first before you put it on for the child that's next to you, because if you're not okay, you're not going to be able to do anything helpful for the person next to you who is in need. And it's the same type of consideration. If you're not in a good place because you're moving towards burnout, because you're moving towards compassion fatigue, you're not helpful at the time that they actually need you. And having a conversation with your meaningful, connected people to say, hey, let's put some boundaries in place and do it in a way that we know that this is how we take care of each other. It's not about putting each other off. Okay, I'll check in again for questions before we move on to the next slide. Anything come up, Mary?
Aimee, we do have one question. So what recommendation would you have for someone who's dumping slime on you? Or potentially if it's someone who's you're not super close with, and how do you either remove yourself from those situations or assist them in receiving the support that they need?
That's okay. That's a great multi-layered question. So the first thing that I would go back to is deciding boundaries for yourself with that individual or with the content of the information that is being shared, right? And decide for yourself what is that you can and can't take at any given time. And I suppose when I say take, it's really more about tolerate. What is it that you can or can't tolerate at any given time? Spend some time setting those parameters up for yourself, right? And then think about what it is that you'd like to say to them to convey that to them. And it might mean that you need to write it down and you need to reread it a few times, or that you need to practice it in your mind so that kind of when it comes at you, maybe in an unexpected way, or maybe in a way that you know when it's coming, you're ready for it. And take the time to say to that person, if it comes at you unexpected, then you have to deal with it in the moment. If you have the space to talk with that person when they're not in crisis and talk about what you'd like to do to set boundaries, that's optimal. We just aren't always afforded the timing of that. And I would say something like this: hey, I really appreciate that you trust me enough to come talk to me about, A, B, and C. And I really want to do the best that I can to be supportive to you. So here's what I'd like to ask of you. Can we set up a code or a time frame where when you say to me, hey, I really need to talk to you, I can then say to you, absolutely, can I please have 5 to 10 minutes to just get myself in the right space and then I'll be ready? Or, you know, there might be times when I'm having a bad day myself and I don't know if I'm going to be helpful in the moment. And so if I say to you, I really want to listen to you and be helpful, I'm not in a place where I can do that today. Can we plan to talk about that tomorrow morning? Or can we plan to set time, on Thursday at 2 o'clock to talk about that? How would that work for you, right? That's the way that I would say it to the person. It doesn't mean that the person is going to immediately respond well. It might take them aback because it might be a shift. That's okay. You still have the right to set boundaries for yourself. And so long as you are starting by saying, I really appreciate that you trust me to come to me, and you're also articulating, I want to be as supportive as possible. And in order to do that, this is what I need. You've done your work. They might need to go back, take time and breathe and think about it. That's okay. Check in with them. Hey, have you thought about what I shared? I want to follow up. I want to make sure again that this is helpful and meaningful for you, and in times where I might need you as well, right? That we can have the same agreement if that's the type of relationship that it is, where it's really about somebody needing help that's beyond what you think you can give them. It's also very important to be honest about that, to say, I don't mind listening to you and I appreciate that you're coming to me. I don't think that I can give you everything that you might need right now. I'm wondering how else you might be able to get help around this issue. I'm wondering if there's someone else that you are able to talk to as well. It might mean that you need to problem solve a little bit with them, but problem solving doesn't mean that you come up with the solutions or the suggestions. It means that you ask questions to say, is there a time when I haven't been around where you've been able to find someone to talk to when it was helpful? Is there a time when you've ever considered, talking to somebody who has a little bit more experience or skill around the issue that you are bringing up? Right? It might be that at that point, if you can direct them to your, if there's a work-life assistance program or an EAP or a therapist, and normalize that around saying, sometimes people who just are completely unconnected to us are the best people to listen because they can really give us the clearest picture. I might not be the right person because I know you and we have a relationship. So it might be hard for me to say things to you. Or there might be things that you don't necessarily say to me because we already know each other. And sometimes a paid, trained stranger is going to be able to give you the best support. So I know that that was many different suggestions about ways to approach the situation. Hopefully that's helpful just in terms of, this kind of an issue kind of happening on a spectrum. Okay. So why don't we switch to the next slide, which is kind of talking about some of the things that we need to practice. So remember, we're still just in that preventive place right now. So I'm still only talking about all the things that we just need to be practicing on a day-to-day basis that are important for us to think about. And when we talk about practicing, right, so this is kind of that next level, the things that can help increase our stamina when we find ourselves in a situation that's very difficult. So we talk about this in terms of mindfulness, grounding, and affective flexibility. So mindfulness is simply about being aware, developing and expanding our awareness of ourself and our reactions to the world around us and what we're taking in from the world around us. Mindfulness is simply about being present in the moment. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy because there's a lot that I think we all end up with our minds racing a mile a minute. Where, I was trying to sit quietly yesterday for about 20 minutes. And not only was it hard for me to sit quietly, but at the end of that 20 minutes, I realized that I had gone through a thought process that had brought me through more than 50 different thoughts, and half of them were unrelated. It happened, but it was all stuff that I clearly needed to clear out of my mind that kind of had been sitting there and ruminating. Mindfulness isn't about a perfection, it's about a process. It's about taking the moment to say, I'm driving down the thruway and a stray leaf blows in front of my windshield. And I notice the stray leaf that beautifully blows past my windshield. It's about catching yourself in the middle of dinner with your family and going, wow, we're all around the table together, right? And maybe we're laughing, and maybe we're having meaningful conversation, or maybe we're just filling our bellies. How about that? Simply pausing for a moment and finding opportunities to continue to pause. Grounding, and we'll talk about grounding in practicing preventive measures as well as in responsive measures. Grounding is about remembering that you are here. So I talk about it like fastening your imaginary seatbelt sometimes. It's about reconnecting your body to your brain. Grounding can happen, and you have a blue sheet. Well, it's not blue for you. It's the supporting ourselves and our workforce handout that I tend to print on blue paper. So I call it the blue sheet when I hand it out in person. It talks about things like breath work and blowing bubbles to help control our breathing and bring us back to a connection between our body and our mind. Things like hand washing that will let our brains know our hands are touching each other, right? We feel the water running through our hands. We smell the soap. We smell the hand sanitizer. Reconnecting with our senses to let her know that our body is safe and our brain and our body are connected. And then finally, affective flexibility or emotional flexibility. And this is a really important one because it helps you to move between your emotions. There will be times when you're very sad. And in a moment after being sad, somebody, a child, an animal, something on TV happens that makes you laugh, right? And it's okay to be flexible between those emotions to say, right now I'm sad, and I'm going to take a few moments to be sad. And then when something happens in front of me that is joyful, it's okay for me to shift gears and be happy in that moment as well. The flexibility is what helps us to stay unstuck in the midst of crisis. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll change to the next slide. And I want to get through this next slide, and then I think we'll be able to move to opening it up for questions. I'm noticing the time. So when we talk about effective responsiveness, this is about what do you do in the midst of the muck when you realize, oh, I'm kind of in it. I'm stressed. Things are rough. The crisis is happening. Now what? Well, those grounding practices that I briefly mentioned before are just as important because those are the pieces that, again, bring you back to reality, right? I'm here. I'm alive. I'm real. I am in connection with my life. Sometimes it's about emotional stress. Sometimes it's about physical stress. And in either instance, regrounding yourself, things like even just taking your index finger and your thumb and pressing them together, pressing your tongue to the roof of your mouth, spreading your toes out as they are on the floor. All of those are ways that very quickly remind our brain that our body is present and connected to the world that we're in and help to stabilize us. Debriefing is really about that connection with another person after an incident has happened. And when I say debriefing right after the incident, I'm really talking about just going over the facts of what just happened. This doesn't have to be in the midst of crisis. This can be after a meeting, whether it was a good meeting or a stressful meeting. It's a great practice to get into, and it's great to do as well when there are challenges. It's not a time to talk about our emotions. Our emotions are the last place that we actually want to be right after coming out of a stressful situation. We want to stay as engaged as possible to our thinking brain, which is in our prefrontal cortex, because those concrete facts, whether we remember what someone else is saying or not, whether we can pull forward every single, sequential fact that happened or not, the exercise of it is what helps to keep us engaged in our logical thinking. The emotions come later, right? Leaning into and both. I think this one's especially important right now because both good and challenging things can be happening at the same time. An example, we are most of us are in positions where we have to work remotely. So the challenge to that, or the stressful part of that, might be that it's hard to navigate how to get our work done if it's not how we're used to operating, because we're sharing space with our partners, our children. It might be because it feels very isolating because we're the only one living in our space. And we have this opportunity to reconnect with those around us, to reground ourselves in our house, to not take the extra hour to have to fight traffic, to feel a little bit more physically safe because our risk of exposure has been reduced, right? Both are happening. It's not an either or. And it's important that we're trying to always think about both perspectives, especially when we find ourselves getting stuck in the negative. It doesn't mean we get rid of the negative. If something's not okay, it's not okay. You're allowed to feel that and experience when it's not okay. And what helps you move through it is holding that and honoring that surrounding you are also things that can be helpful, even if they're small, even if they're hard to see. It's not about one being more or less or better or worse. It's about both things that are challenging and things that are strengths being present at the same time. The final two pieces, recharging and resetting, it's literally that. Knowing when you need to give yourself a timeout, when you need to say, I need 5 minutes, I need 30 minutes, I need to go to bed earlier tonight, I need to do whatever it is to help recharge, read my book, do some sewing, do some cooking, just stretch a little bit, and then reset. The reset is about reflecting. What is it that I was doing before that was working? What is it that I was doing before that was getting me stuck? Is there just one small thing I can change or try differently to help me move forward this time? And then finally, guidance and support. Guidance and support, like I said, is sometimes very much about seeking out some therapeutic intervention. You don't have to have a chronic, persistent mental illness to receive guidance and support. Guidance and support is something that is beneficial for everyone. Sometimes that happens through community groups. Sometimes that happens through therapy and therapeutic intervention. It doesn't have to be, that you're in therapy for 5 years, or maybe that's important and necessary depending on what the work is that you want to do for yourself. Who is the person who's trained and skilled that I can go to help me move through this and provide different mechanisms for me to move through this in the way that I want to? It should never be about someone doing it to you. It should always be about how you bring this person in to partner with you to help you move to what goal you're looking to achieve in terms of your own personal wellness. Okay, and then the final slide is really about hope. And the hope really being that this is possible, that we are human beings, and while we have limits as human beings, we also have some really amazing untapped potentials. We are resilient, we are malleable, we are flexible beings that can allow us to keep trying and try again and try new things and try something different, and that we don't ever have to do this alone, that we're never in fact alone. I'll check in with Mary to see if there's any other questions that have come up.
Yes, Aimee, we do have a few questions. So the first question is, how do you support a family member who is going through a very difficult time when you are feeling emotionally exhausted after a work day? I feel bad saying, can we talk about this tomorrow, when the issue is happening at that moment?
Yeah, so I think, again, it goes back to finding the opportunity to set boundaries when the crisis isn't happening, right? To set up a schedule with your family member to say, you know, I know that there are times where you need me and I want to be there for you. So when can we do that? You know, I get home at 5:15 and this is what I need. You know, I can talk to you at 8:30 tonight. I can talk to you at 5:30 after I give myself 15 minutes. I can schedule Tuesdays and Thursdays, whatever that might look like. The worst thing, honestly, that you can actually do, unless it's, I mean, you know, unless somebody's, you know, literally in a life-threatening position in that moment, really life-threatening in that moment, the best thing sometimes that we can do is actually help that other person be able to strengthen their own window of tolerance as well. And I think it's important that you're differentiating for yourself what's actual, what's life-threatening crisis and what's critical stress, right? You know, if it's that somebody is emotionally in a place where something awful happened and they're crying and they've been waiting for you, and it's kind of catching you off guard, you might in that moment need to say, okay, listen, let's talk now for a few minutes and then let's take a break and come back to this. The best thing you can do is, before the crisis happens, set parameters up with your loved ones and individuals to say, you know, I know that you tend to wait till I get out of work and you might then come to me because you know I'm done at 5. Why don't we schedule our check-ins for 6 o'clock? Why don't we schedule our check-ins for a certain day? And again, I go back to, if you just can't do it, you shouldn't feel bad about saying to someone, I can't do this right now, talk to so-and-so instead, or I need 10 minutes before I can help you. What I think we probably should start thinking about feeling worse about is if we try to help somebody in a way that's not actually helpful, right? I mean, I guess I'm not suggesting anybody feels worse, but to be thinking about that shift from, you have to be in an okay place yourself in order to actually help someone, and to convey that to the person around, I want to help you and I can't do that right now, right? Is really what helps to take care of them more, and asking them to hold on just a little bit longer, to breathe a little bit until you can come to them. If they've managed waiting all those hours till you've gotten home from work, right? They have it in them to manage just a little bit longer, and you're allowed to set parameters for yourself around what will work. And then I would say, be gentle with yourself and take some time to do what you need to love yourself and work on giving yourself permission to set boundaries with other people, right? You taking care of yourself first and being gentle with yourself that you are a human being is really what will help long term with you being able to give people the care and the support that they're looking for.
Thank you, Aimee. And that actually goes really well into our next question. What if the family member in question is a child that you can't reschedule, and what type of language would be helpful to use in terms of burnout, or just with assisting a child with all of that?
Yeah, that's a great one. So, you know, in terms of children, one of the things that's amazing about children is how observant they are and how much they can really pick up what it is that needs to happen through the way that we model and problem solve. So children are, you know, tricky because developmentally that can look different between a child who's developmentally 5 or a child who's developmentally 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, right? So that's a piece of it. With any child who's willing and open to it, usually younger children, you can do grounding exercises together, right? You can do breath work together. You can sit silently with them together. Sometimes the most important thing for children, if it's not a physical crisis and it's an emotional crisis, sometimes the best thing that we can do with children is sit quietly and just listen and practice our breathing to let them see how we are sitting quietly. It doesn't always mean we have to solve the problem. Validation, obviously, is another piece. We don't ever want somebody to tell us that what we're feeling is wrong or not important enough. So validating for that child how they're feeling is another piece that's important. And if we're talking about just generally the demands of children, then what I say is, because you know there will be so many more moments that you must be present with them, it's really important that you schedule out your time for yourself. It has to happen. I have a child with special needs. I have multiple children at multiple ages, and the reality is that I am no good to any of them, regardless of their demands, if I have not figured out what to do for myself. And doing for yourself doesn't have to be the big stuff. We're not talking about, I will do yoga every day for an hour, and I will eat kale every night in a beautiful salad, and I will go to the movies once a week, and I will read one book a week, and I will find time to have an hour conversation with my friends. That's impossible. None of that is ever going to happen. And then I'm going to beat myself up for not being able to accomplish all the things I need to take care of myself. This is where it's about going back to those things that we need to tend to ourselves. Am I doing what I need to take care of myself physiologically on a day-to-day basis? Am I finding just 3 to 4 minutes a night or a day to do breath work? It might be how I start my morning. It might be how I close out my day. And how do I shift gears? How do I say my day is over now at work and it's time to move into my time at home, right? Keeping things separate so that the energy that I have built up and stored for each part of my life is present for it, and it doesn't feel like it spills over in a way that I move into exhaustion. Those routines for yourself are probably the most critical piece of making sure that you can be there for a child in their day-to-day, as well as when they really need someone. For older children, developmentally older children, it's okay to say, we're going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer and we're going to take 5 minutes. And then I will listen to everything. And you do your breath work, you sit quietly, you do your self-talk and talk to yourself through, this will not be forever. Probably we will spend about an hour talking about this, right? Whatever it is that you need to do. Ideally, the more you can set routine and boundaries ahead of time and have that communication ahead of time, even with your child, the better of a position you'll be in, and it helps to model for them how to cope and move through stress, because they are watching at every age and they are learning by what we do. You are going to expend energy either way. I think that's the last piece I want to leave you with. Sometimes everything that I've talked about today feels like a lot of extra energy. I'm going to challenge you to think about it this way. You will expend energy one of two ways. You will expend it by reacting in the midst of crisis, or you will expend it by getting yourself prepared for when the crisis happens. It's either or, right? If we spend our energy getting ready for when the crisis happens, we will not expend as much energy in the midst of crisis because we will be in a position where we can move through it. And it will be better for us physically, mentally, and emotionally.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I know there are a few questions still lingering out there. We will share those with Aimee afterwards. Particularly, we had a question if there were some resources you could recommend. So we'll get together after and send that around. But I did want to thank you, Aimee, for this incredibly informative and empowering hour. I think you've given us a lot of really valuable tools that we can use in these coming weeks and months. It's been a really valuable reminder that it's really important to take time for yourself before you can help others and help the community around you. So thank you so much. I also, before we go, wanted to thank everybody who has joined us here today. We hope you found the webinar helpful. You can follow the Western New York Women's Foundation on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn for all our latest updates. As I mentioned before, we are planning to do more free webinars in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for those offerings. I also wanted to really quickly mention that later today, we are going to be launching a directory of women-owned small businesses in Western New York. These are businesses that are a cornerstone of our community, and they've been incredibly creative in their offerings to everyone during this time. Our female entrepreneurs deserve your support, and now you'll be able to easily check our website to see how you can do so. So you can visit westernnewyorkwomensfoundation.org for more details starting this afternoon. So again, a very special thank you to Aimee and to Mary, who has been a rock star in the comments section. And thank you all for joining us today. I hope all can be safe and be well.